Hello, my name is Abby Mickey, and you are listening to the Wheel Talk podcast. We are back this week to talk about Ride London, a little bit of Thüringen, and I don't know, we'll just see where the conversations take us. I am joined today by Gracie Alvin. Gracie, hello.
Hey. Thankfully my voice is a little bit better this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised actually you didn't just fully lose your voice with commentating on the Giro.
Yeah, it was between 5 and 7 hours of talking per night, which is for me like probably 500% more than what I would talk if I didn't have to work. So yeah, a little bit tired.
And Matt Deneve. Matt, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And we have a special guest with us this week who did not commentate for 5 to 7 hours on Ride London, but did commentate on the race. Rebecca Charlton, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It is a joy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I'm a huge fan of your pod in various guises over the previous months, but my voice is going, and that was only 3 days of Ride London commentary. So yeah, I'm a lightweight here, aren't I?
Gracie's just like on another level when it comes to life, so...
No, yeah, no, you wouldn't be surprised if you saw what else I did between those hours. So I kept it very low key. Matt and Simon Gerrans, they both got kids. They had to actually do like things in the day, whereas I had bachelorette life. So yeah, that was how I did it.
Wait, your cat doesn't keep you as occupied as kids?
Well, I was away. I wish I could have taken it with me. I missed her.
That's a good point. Yeah, she's so cute. Anyway, so we're going to talk about Ride London. We don't have any questions this week, but I'm sure hopefully we can answer some of your burning questions that you didn't get around to asking us. This episode of the Wheel Talk podcast is made possible by the generous support of our members at the Escape Collective. Monthly memberships actually just kicked off for $11.99, or save 30% with an annual membership to the website. That comes with tons of perks, from being able to comment on articles, access to our member chats, and stuff like that. For more information, head on over to escapecollective.com/join. That's escapecollective.com/join. And make sure to check out Escape Collective from everything from coverage of women's racing to the nichest of niche articles by the one and only Ian Treloar, to some really interesting stuff. And actually, Matt has a really cool article in the works that you will not want to miss. So head on over to escapecollective.com, become a member. Monthly memberships just kicked off just in time for the summer racing season, so take advantage of that. And thank you so much to everyone who has already become a member and joined the Escape Collective. We are incredibly grateful for everything that you allow us to do. So thank you so much to our members. And yeah, if you like what we do, then support us. Join the Escape. Ride London. Where should we start? Okay, so in my opinion, a really exciting 3 days of racing. We had more live coverage than I actually anticipated, so that was really nice, because when I looked at GCN, it just said an hour each day, and there was a little bit more than that. I think we should start with the stage winners. We had 2 stages won by Charlotta Kuhl and 1 stage won by Chloe Dygart. We're going to dig into the whole Canyon SRAM thing. I think we should start with Kuhl, because I feel like this just kind of continues to show that she's really an incredible up-and-coming sprinter, and I'm so excited to see her go up against Lorena Wiebes when it comes to the bigger races later in the summer.
Yeah, I really agree. It was kind of a shame that she didn't have a stronger sprint field, but I think like the sprint finishes were actually still really good to watch. And, you know, again, we've talked about Dygert, how strong she is. She's not even a sprinter, but like, I think that long sustaining effort she can hold, which is so impressive. And there were still some fast finishes in the group as well. So Charlotta Kuhl and the DSM team didn't exactly have it easy.
Yeah, I think everyone was disappointed, weren't they, when we found out that SD weren't going to be there and Wiebes wouldn't be coming back for that battle with her previous lead out. But also losing Elisa Balsamo for Trek Segafredo on day one. We were so excited to see where those two would go in a head-to-head. So I think a lot of it was probably quite affected by crashes, unfortunately, on day one, like quite a few spills. in the first stage. But yeah, definitely enjoyed those gallops nonetheless.
Yeah, and it was cool to see Trek Segafredo kind of adjust their plans when they lost Balsamo, because that would have been a huge blow to the team. I mean, she's been coming into better form, and she was such an incredible sprinter last year. And unfortunately, she's going to be out for quite some time, I think, with the extensive list of injuries that she sustained in that crash. But Trek Segafredo were really aggressive on the first stage. Well, pretty much the whole race, but on that first stage, they did a great job of like trying to break it up. And it ended up not being just a straight sprint finish. There was definitely like a split, and there were groups that came in behind. And I think I expected that stage to be a little bit more challenging given the profile. Like, it wasn't just purely flat, and it was a really exciting stage. But definitely, like, hats off to Cool and Pfeiffer Georgie for like the incredible lead out, because she's just like also just been so impressive this year, and I have really started to like her quite a bit as a rider, and like an all-around rider as well.
She's just brilliant, and she's just so lovely as well, like off the bike. I'm always fascinated how riders switch that on and off, and she has just been a joy, as I say, not only to watch in the racing, but I have a lot of opportunities to dive straight in with post-race interviews. And obviously, as you'll all know as well, in various capacities that you work in the peloton, yeah, it makes a difference when you have such an engaged rider that will not only do so much in a race, but actually talk about it properly and kind of be open to talking about those tactics and how it played out in interviews as well, rather than kind of just giving those stock answers. And Bifa's just fascinating, and she just keeps getting better as well. And I was interested to talk to her about, you mentioned that split, Abby, and about sort of 13 riders. I think it kind of swelled a little bit, lost a couple of riders, and then Dygott made it across to it, with Micah Vanderdown, I think, as well, of Canyon SRAM. But what was interesting for me in commentary was, obviously, I'm being attentive to make sure, like, who's in this group, who am I going to be calling in this sprint finish, to make sure, yeah, I know that I'm going to get it absolutely spot on for the viewers. And I'm thinking, right, Lizzie Deignan is driving and driving and driving to split this down, and then I see, of course, that Charlotte Kool and Pfeiffer Georgie are in there, not what she perhaps would have wanted.
Yeah, that's like never what you want to see when you've brought the group down. But I mean, like, Trek, it was so impressive to see both Loretta Hanson and Lizzie in that group. They're both coming back into racing now. Like, Lizzie obviously did the Vuelta and did the Ardennes, or the tail end of the spring season, and for her, I mean, she's just kind of building and building and building. But she was incredible this week. I mean, she was like sprinting against one of the best sprinters in the world and doing really well. And she's not even really a sprinter. So it was cool to see her back in the peloton and back doing really well. And like really awesome to see Loretta back in that split, because I mean, she had some horrendous injuries.
I really felt like Cool was easily the best sprinter. Dygott was the strongest rider in the peloton, and Lizzie was the smartest. And I was actually, I think, enjoying that the most, watching exactly what Lizzie was doing. I think that I've just become such a big fan of hers, and it's just so cool to see her back racing again, because she's so good to watch. And you can see, like, in those breakaway situations, she's like yelling at the other riders in those groups and like using her arms and, you know, trying to really motivate riders to make it work. And she did that throughout the whole 3 days. How she shepherds her other teammates, where she positions herself in the race, but especially in those last few kilometers. Like, I couldn't take my eyes off her, because it's fascinating, some of the decisions she was making in the race. And I think a lot of riders could go back and just watch her and learn so much from that.
Yeah, I really agree with that on the learning as well. And yeah, I was noticing how much she was just gesturing, and she's just so on it, isn't she? And the speed at which they obviously knew Balsamo wasn't going to be back in the race, and they completely, as you said earlier, just completely changed the team tactics out on the road. And I can only imagine how quick it is for you as riders to make those decisions, but not only make that decision, but execute that in the way they did. And I think, yeah, I mean, you know, Abby, I could talk all day on this, you know, touching upon the fact that coming back into the peloton as a mother, and everything that goes with that and what her body's been through. But I was thinking back to the women's tour when she won overall. I think it was pretty much spot on 9 months after she had her first child. And then I think I'm right in saying this is pretty much exactly the same time, 9 months since her second. And yeah, I mean, it's no small feat, is it, getting in there? And she's quite often said in the week leading up to Ride London, you know, I'd quite like to gradually get back to the pointy end of the action. But, you know, she wasn't just at the pointy end. The amount of work she did just make that split happen, to drive on the front. And then, as you were saying, to finish that off when she's not an out-and-out sprinter. I mean, it was pretty special, I think.
I honestly can't wrap my head around having two babies and coming back. Like, I can't wrap my head around it. I'm like,
no, but that just tells you how you know, talented she is, but also the very strong head she's got on her shoulders and all the support she has around her. So you know, like, not everyone can do that for all three reasons, and she's got all, like, plenty of good reasons behind her. But at the end of the day, you still have to execute it, and she does that, and I think that's the most impressive part.
I'm curious to see what the rest of the season holds for her. Will she get more opportunities, do we think, to lead, or will she be riding more in the service of others, you know, at the tour, something like that, do we think?
You know, it would be surprising for me, looking at her results in the past and also her form now, given that this is the very beginning, to not see her going for at least a couple stages in the tour, but mostly having, like, captain duties on her shoulders, with kind of thinking about the other riders they have on the team and the ambition there. I mean, we'll see how Elisa Longoborghini comes out of this kind of horrendous spring that she's had with illness. She's just been sick over and over and over. And I think with the time trial and in the tour, that they'll really be eyeing Elisa for, like, a general classification result. Elisa or Gaia, I'm curious to see how she will do in the time trial, or if they'll kind of keep her for the Giro, and if she'll even race the tour. That's kind of up in the air. But I do feel like, yeah, I would be shocked if Lizzie didn't get some kind of opportunity at the tour. Shocked and disappointed.
Yeah, I don't know if she even, like, it's really hard to know for sure, but I feel like she really enjoys being the team captain and being more of the support rider nowadays. I think that she's the kind of rider that when all the chips are down, you can lean on her to go for a good result, as we've seen in Ride London. But I don't think she's, you know, back now to just win races. I think she's back because she enjoys her job and she enjoys that team. And I think that she might put her hand up for one or two stages in the tour, but I think it'll only be maybe in the moment, because she'll be feeling good and, like, up for it, because I think that she'll go into that race just excited to do the race and excited to, like, have a really good crack with the whole team.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get the opportunity, or hopefully she gets the opportunity to go for those stages, and hopefully we get the opportunity to see her at the pointy end, because as you guys say, she's fascinating to watch, and it's a real masterclass for anyone watching and getting into racing.
I mean, she's just such a legend that it goes along with, you know, last year at the tour, we said seeing Marianne Vos in yellow just felt like right. And I feel like seeing Lizzie go for a win at the Tour de France Femme, it also just feels right. It feels like she's part of that, like, group of women that are still in the peloton that are in this transitional generational thing where, like, she was part of the when it was the World Cups and everything, pre-World Tour, pre-minimum salaries, all of that, and has been part of the growth. And so before she leaves the sport, which we don't know when that will be, like, hopefully she's in it for a little bit longer because she's just such an incredible rider, that I think, yeah, it would just feel like all the stars had aligned to see her, like, win a stage or even try to win a stage.
Yeah, and I think I do. I'm guilty of rolling out the cliches on the mic and commentary, but I kept saying over the weekend, never say never, because I think, you know, all of us would have looked going into stage 3 at the time gap, albeit a fairly small time gap. But when you're looking at a GC up against Charlotte Kool and you're Lizzie Deignan, you know, chatting to her pre-stage, she's like, well, look at the profile. It's pan flat in the centre of London. I mean, what can we do? But equally with that, she was sort of saying, you know, we will try, and we won't, you know, we're going to put up a huge fight. We won't just assume that we know how this result's going to play out. And actually genuinely believe her when she says that, because the amount of times people have sat here and written her off, and actually the plan has changed on the road and she's done something special in a finale that you wouldn't necessarily put her down to be a favourite on paper. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where the season goes. And like you were saying, Abby, I think there's so many question marks around the rest of the team, where people are at. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
I think we need to talk about Canyon SRAM, because when you watch like Lizzie race and then you kind of like move your eyes over to Canyon SRAM, I mean, the first stage, the amount that the team grew in the 3 stages was wild to me. Like, it was so cool to watch how they, in my opinion, like really messed up the tactics on stage 1 and then flipped it around for stage 2 and ended up taking their first win of the season. And also just Chloe Dygert continuing to be just wildly impressive. But I actually wrote a really critical piece about Canyon SRAM after the first stage, because I was watching their tactics and I was watching what they were doing, and they had, 3 riders in that front group. And it was because Chloe Dygert basically dragged Micah van de Duin up to that front group, and then her and Soraya Paladin ended up sprinting for Micah. And I thought, what are they doing? Like, I love Micah. Like, she's amazing. There would have to be some crazy amount of luck and like some crazy amount of drama for that to be a matchup where I would see Micah van de Duin being able to compete with Cool. And so I was really confused about, maybe they wanted to give her a chance, but if you have 3 of the strongest riders in that group and they're all on the same team, like, why wasn't Micah van de Duin doing like 90% of the work? And then as soon as they hit that group, like, Chloe should have just launched and gone for an attack, because we can see how strong she is. We've seen it in every race she's done this year. And so I was really critical of their tactics on stage 1, and then stage 2 they flipped it around and just had an incredible lead out for Chloe, and she was able to take a win. And it was fascinating to watch the turnaround. And
not just the lead out as well, having Micah van de Duin off the front, with 12Ks to go, reducing the pressure on the team, and then it came back together, 500 to go, where Paladin was able to do her thing. And then watching Dygert sprint, it was kind of funny. It was less of a lead out and more like, and less of a sprint. She kind of just rode away. It was almost like a late break, but it just happened to be like 200 meters to go in the stage. Like you say, wildly impressive, Abby. And we've talked about this in the last few weeks about how she's still learning her craft, really. She's still so raw on the road, and is now winning World Tour races and still trying to work out how to do it. And I think the next, I've said this a few times, but the next few years are going to be very, very interesting to watch from her, about whether she does go down this sprinting path, whether she focuses more on the solo stuff, whether she does a bit of everything, whether she focuses on her climbing like she kind of hinted at in one interview during the week. Very interesting to see where that all goes over the next year or so, I guess.
I thought it's someone that also needs that extra props was Soraya Paladin. I think like she's been getting stronger and stronger the last few years, and I think she's kind of just been on our radar. But I felt like this was a bit of a breakthrough week for her as well. And I think she is really capable of a lot. And I think, I think it gives a lot of motivation and strength to a team when you start getting good results and you might have a winner or two in the team. And I think that, Canyon SRAM's full of talent, but they just haven't had some of those good results. And I think that's kind of just been dragging on them a little bit. But I think you could see from having Chloe in the team and some of those other young stars that are coming up, that's actually helped Paladin as well. And I think I haven't seen her quite that strong before, especially on stage 2. So I'm excited to see, some more progress from her as well.
And confidence is infectious, right? Like, once we see one rider take a win, it wouldn't be a surprise to see them get a bunch of wins in the next few weeks. Now that they've kind of got their monkey off their back, as it were, they've finally got that win at the World Tour level. They can now, maybe breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. And they've had so many good riders this season that have just been off the pace just a little bit. And maybe that's all it takes. Maybe just that one win and they start believing in themselves a bit more. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a handful more wins very soon after this one.
Yeah, and I can only imagine the pressure on the shoulders of riders sort of waiting for that victory, that everyone, we will sit around and talk about when are they going to do it, when are they going to do it, and actually, like you say, Matt, to get that off the shoulders must be huge. And we so often see that narrative, don't we? And then the wins just start coming through. But it was interesting seeing Daiga around the race and how much she was suffering with her leg, and I don't know how much of an impact actually. I believe I'm right in saying she came down pretty hard on stage 1. There's a lot we didn't see on the TV cameras, that there'd been quite a few spills before we came on air, but I think she was suffering a lot, and actually to see what she did with that in mind on stage 2 as well was pretty remarkable, seeing her afterwards after the podium.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Rebecca, because there was some reporting in the days following that Daiga was limping around after the stages, and she gave a quote saying something like, this injury is going to affect the rest of my career. For the rest of my career, I'll have to deal with this. And you were at the race. Did you see much of that? What was your impression of how she was doing, and what do you think that looks like going forward for her?
Yeah, massively. I mean, going back to stage 2 and seeing her unleash that power and essentially just power away and to take that stage victory. Afterwards, she was in bits. She was on the floor, just clearly in so much pain with that leg, with that huge injury that she's been coming back from. And for me and a few other people were sort of looking at it thinking, right, how hard has she come down on this stage? But I don't know how much of a lasting effect it had with or without coming down, whether she came down on that side, we didn't see it. But she was clearly in a lot of pain, and actually quite a few people had to help her to get to that podium. So she was suffering, and it just speaks volumes that she can still put that sort of power out and simply ride away.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's kind of like she's riding with 1.5 legs, and that's kind of like a bit sad for the rest of the peloton. But I was wondering too, watching that when she was on the ground after stage 2, and you could see it wasn't put on, like she was literally in pain and it looked like it was cramping a bit. And I was just thinking, like, imagine if that injury had never happened, like where would she be now? What would have she already achieved? And how would that have changed that narrative there for her and the team?
Yeah, and also just going back to the options that she seems to have, and you can say, right, on paper, she's very likely to be able to execute it in this way, but actually coming in on something that looks like a pure sprinter stage and still managing to finish it off. She's just phenomenal.
I mean, and like part of stage 2 was obviously Kuhl came down in the final, like right before the final kilometer, but Chloe was so well positioned into that sprint, and part of the reason that she was she had so much space when the sprinting really started was took that corner really well and distanced Deignan before she even had to go up against her, really. And part of that was the lead out as well. But man, she's just so impressive as a rider. Even her bridging to that group on stage 1, like she basically did it all on her own, just dragging Talita de Jong and Maaike van der Doen up to that group. And it was really impressive to watch. And I'm just like, it's like wild.
It wasn't easy to get across, was it? It would be good to touch upon Charlotte Kuhl's crash as well. Just over 1K to go, obviously, luckily within 3K. I feel like I'm the one dwelling on all the crashes here. I'll be more positive later in the pod. But she said to me, and I believe she said this to a few journalists, that so for Kuhl, that was the hardest she says she's ever come down in her career to date. So it was a bit of an unknown watching her on stage 3, especially not going for any intermediates. I was thinking, like, how is she faring? How is she feeling? Perhaps that made it slightly closer on the line than it maybe would have been. But she said she actually came down really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good thing it wasn't outside of the 3K, because I don't think anyone would have wanted to see the GC shake out because of a crash like that. And definitely made the third stage a little bit more interesting going into it. But I mean, look, when it came to the GC for this race, I feel like I wasn't so focused on it. It was like 3 really good stages of racing, and the GC was kind of always going to be not that exciting just because it's a flattish race, but it just made me miss the women's tour. I'm just so bummed that we don't have that race, because that race is like basically a week of what we saw this week.
Yeah, I was watching, like, I think another reason too that if I was SD Worx, a reason why I wouldn't have gone is because racing in Britain is heavy, but like not in a good way, and there's a lot of crashes. The roads are more dangerous, and I think going to Thüringen is a bit safer. Actually, you get a little bit more racing. It's a bit safer. It's a bit hillier, and I think for them it was better prep for the tours coming up. And I raced in Britain a lot in my career, and I had a love-hate relationship with it because it's really fun and it's always great crowds, and you know, we go on about the organization being one of the better ones, and but yeah, I don't miss the roads. And when I was watching these 3 stages, I was just thinking, oh, I just have flashbacks of some of the terrified moments I had on the British roads, because you could see like the tunnels through the trees, and it's always winding, and the road surfaces aren't great. And yeah, I feel like statistically there's always more crashes there than in other countries. So I was feeling for the riders, and
I do miss it. It's a different beat, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, speaking to sort of the likes of Lizzie and Anna Henderson as well, they were sort of saying that we know, don't know every traffic island, but we know these roads so well, and the pinch points and just how brutal they are. And you could see Lizzie actually choosing quite a tricky narrow bit I think that's when that split happened. But yeah, they know that those roads are brutal and can position themselves so far up. But it's I agree. It's a completely different beast on our roads. But I want to just touch upon the women's tour, Abby, because that's a race obviously so close to my heart. I've been the host presenter for the coverage here in the UK on ITV for many years now, and yeah, it's heartbreaking for me and so many people obviously to not have that race, but it plans are in motion to get it back for next year, so just absolutely crossing everything. For this race there were so many British riders that had such incredible races. You had some hometown teams that were like really aggressive trying to get off the front, and then with Lizzie and Pfeiffer and Anna Henderson, all 3 in the race doing incredibly well, it's just like kind of watching the state of affairs of cycling in the UK at the moment is just such a bummer, because it's just like they'd had so many good years there for a while, and I really hope the race does come back, because it's so important to have World Tour races not in continental Europe. And I think that the women's tour is such a good middle ground to have a World Tour race that's not in Europe but is still close enough that the big teams show up, because like Tour California was also amazing, but you only ever really had like 2 of the World Tour teams show up because it was such a big trek for them to get there. So I think it's really important for the growth of the sport to have that, and like to have the races in Australia in the early season and stuff like that. And so fingers crossed that the race comes back strong, and yeah, that we get to watch it. So important, and every rider, as you say, would speak to me, you know, off camera and say, we love this race, the organisation, what it's done for the sport, we want to come here and race it and make it good and field it. And so yeah, it's a gaping hole that we really hope is back. Yeah, also, like, as a rider, I mean, I will never forget the breakfasts. The breakfasts were so good.
Yeah, they were.
Like, after we've slagged off our roads, let's just redeem ourselves back with the women's buffet breakfast.
But it's so important, like, as a rider, like, if you look at the difference between racing, like, the Giro and the food there and you racing the women's tour, it's very important for a rider.
What stood out? What was on the buffet that took your fancy?
I mean, it was just like, well, there was like the full English spread, but it was also just like there was an amazing variety and everything was really good. And I crashed out on stage 4, I think, when I did the women's tour. Thanks to Iris. Shout out Iris for taking me out on that stage. My own teammate. No, just kidding. It was my fault.
Iris.
But then the whole week, like, the only thing I was looking forward to every day, because I still had to stay for the whole race, was just the breakfasts.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Very good. Just like when you get the continental European breakfast, they're just so sad compared to like a good, stodgy, lots of variety English breakfast, lots of hash browns, lots of eggs, lots of everything. It's good.
Yeah, you can leave the cold cuts off of my breakfast platter, please. I'm saying warm
hash brown all the way.
Yeah. You touched on Thüringen a bit, Gracie, and I want to like dive into the two races going on at the same time, and that Thüringen is not World Tour and yet fielded arguably like a more competitive field than Ride London, and why there were multiple World Tour teams that went to Thüringen that didn't go to Ride London, and also like Canyon SRAM had a split squad, and kind of why that would be. One of the reasons being that it's better prep for the tours coming up with 6 stages. It's a little bit safer with the roads. But also, like, some of the smaller teams, I wrote a piece on escapecollective.cc.com if you want to check it out. It's a great website. I wrote a piece about the relegation battle and how that is kind of coming into play in the Women's World Tour this year, with the World Tour licenses are up at the end of this season, and everything is going to get shaken up with the top 15 teams will be granted World Tour licenses if they want them and if they fulfill the requirements. And other than that, there's teams that are going to miss out. We've got a couple teams that are just on the cusp of losing their World Tour licenses. And for a race like Thüringen, it's, if you break up the points, you can get not more points than Ride London, but almost an equal amount if you are able to put riders kind of in the top 10 of Thüringen, especially in the GC. And it's a really interesting dynamic that we now have in the Women's World Tour, where we saw, like with the Men's World Tour last year, it really forced teams like Israel Premier Tech to do a ton of smaller races, for better or for worse. And now we're seeing in the women's, like, Human Powered Health didn't even like show up to Ride London, and yet they've been at smaller races. Like, we've had Audrey at smaller races in France trying to just get points for the team because they're on the cutoff right now. So it's super interesting, the whole dynamic of the relegation.
Well, I'll pick up on Thüringen. Because I'd been at Ride London with my attention fully on that. I skipped 3 GCN and basically just caught up with how the end of each stage had played out. And because I'd kind of gone back and done a little bit of a recap, I think it accentuated even more the role of SD Worx. And it's like, doing okay, oh right, different SD Worx,
I think people looked at the start list for Ride London and were like, oh, we don't have to race SD Worx, and then looked at the start list for Thüringen and were like, no.
Damn it,
no. I mean, I think, Matt, did you use the word ridiculous in your write-up? But I mean, as I say, amplified the result. Every single stage, different composition of SD Worx and their tactics to just seemingly float to victory. But it felt to me like let's just have a play, right? Who's going to go for it today? Yeah, I'll take this. I know. I'd love to hear your opinions.
I wonder at what point in the race they sat down and were like, oh, we should try and get a stage win for everybody. Like, did they decide that at the start, or did they go, right, we've won the TTT, now Bredewald's won the stage, now Kopecki's won the stage, or whatever it was, and then be like, oh, okay, so there's 3 stages left. Oh, everyone can win one, so how do we make that happen? Or, like, did it just kind of happen that way? I mean, it's kind of, it is ridiculous. I kind of meant that in a playful way, like, ridiculously good, but, like, I'm happy for riders like Misha Redewald and, Barbara Grischi and Lonika Unica and stuff who don't always get those chances. But I don't know. I said last week that I wasn't quite at the point where SD Worx's dominance was annoying or off-putting, but Thüringen definitely tipped me over that edge where it's a bit silly, really. And you can't blame them. And Grace, you put it really well last week when you were talking about, coming back to Australia and racing with Green Edge and, feeling like the tall poppy syndrome kicked in and people didn't want you to win or whatever it was. I think all that's a bit silly, and I don't want to begrudge the riders because they're just doing their job. They're there to win bike races, and that's what they should do, and that's fine. But I think as as a fan, you're kind of like, did they have to go to Turin? Because they've just gone to Ride London, made that a bit closer in the sprints maybe, and then freed it up for other teams in Thüringen. But I don't know. They did what they were entitled to be there, and they did a great job, so good on them.
They also went from like winning the TTT to go to like sweeping the podium on the first road stage. And so right off the bat, you're just like, wow, come on. And like, if you look at the results there, like Marta Locke, who was fourth, so the first non-SD Worx rider, you're like, this would have been an awesome result for you. But SD Worx is just like on a whole nother level. And it feels like they're just it felt like with this race they were just kind of testing out different ways to win the race, different tactics, and different how their riders can be played in different ways ahead of the tours, which is just like awesome. Okay, cool. Like if we were hoping for like some equal footing at the Giro and at the Tour de France Femme, like there's no equal footing right now with SD Worx in the peloton.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about this, but I just find it interesting too. You see it historically, you see it in men's cycling, and you see it most clearly in time trials. And riders from certain teams sometimes get similar times. And I find that fascinating in that, what are they doing as a whole team? Like, what training camps are they doing? What shared coaches do they have? What other strategies are they employing as a whole team that lifts not just their top riders, but everyone? Because in this tour, it wasn't their top riders that were winning. And I just find that interesting in that, what goes behind that? Is it just the mentality? Is it that, of course they've bought a bunch of talented riders, no doubt about that. But like, is it what we just talked about earlier? Is it that motivation that they all get from each other? Or, what else goes into this, and what can other teams learn from that? There's some things that maybe we'll never know because they keep it a secret, not in a bad way. I don't believe they're doing anything naughty, but like, I think that there's so many things that go into being successful that's what I think about when I see these kind of results of like, oh, I'd love to be on the fly on the wall in their training camps and some of their meetings.
Matt, you chatted with Grace Brown, and she had some interesting points on the whole thing.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. It was really nice to chat with Grace. She's a good one, and she was very honest about what it's like racing under the oppressive thumb of SD Worx at the moment. I thought she would kind of bat it away and give the regular line of, oh, we just focus on our own race and do our own thing and don't worry about them. And she's like, well, we started the season like that, but now it's impossible to ignore. You can't just go and do your own race at the moment, because they've got, what did she say? Got Wiebes for the sprints, Demi for the climbs, and Kopecky for everything in between. And true, and then you throw in the rest of the team at Thüringen as well that can win on everything else. She said it was just getting pretty disheartening and frustrating, and she had a real sense of kind of fatigue about the whole thing. Like, there's an inevitability about SD Worx at the moment, it seems like, and I don't know how representative Grace's views are of the peloton, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people feeling like that at the moment.
Yeah, even like you look at like Barbara Garishi, who won the third stage. She's been riding in the peloton for a really long time and really jumped around teams and like hasn't had a win in quite some time. And even she's thriving at SD Worx, and it's really, I was going to say there's something in the water, but that's like, you can't say that in cycling. It's like, or in sport, I guess. No, I think part of it is like wins breed wins, and they're just putting on that jersey must feel like you're on top of the world for every rider on that team at the moment. But it is like, yeah, as a viewer, as a casual fan, if I'm taking myself out of being like a journalist in the sport, it's just like, it is a little bit exhausting because you want to see every team win. And I don't know what other teams can do to challenge them at this point, because it's not like there's that many. It's not like there's that much depth in the peloton yet. We're still on this like in this learning curve of the women's World Tour and teams that shouldn't be World Tour, and that we need a pro team category. And like, I'm going to bang that horse. That's not a saying, for the rest of eternity until the UCI makes a pro team category, makes 3 categories. But like, yeah, there's it's not like there's that many riders for other teams to go swoop up in order to make a team as strong as SD Worx or challenge SD Worx. They have to like come at it in different ways. And I think we will see that later in the season. But at this point, coming off of the spring and like watching Thüringen, it's just like, oh my gosh, like I'm exhausted watching SD Worx just win over and over and over and over and over. I would love to see Marta Locke win a stage of Thüringen.
Well, I think there are some, put the SD Worx stuff aside, I think there are some promising things that came out of Thüringen. I noted down a few. Marta Locke is one of them. She had a really good race, second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and sixth overall. And that's coming off a win at the WorldTour Ladies Tour as well. So great little period for her, and that bodes well coming into the bigger races ahead. And just some Australian riders that I thought did really well during the week. Ruby Roseman Gannon continues to develop really nicely. She was third on the final stage, fourth overall. She's got a bunch of really promising results this season and is on a promising trajectory. Neve Bradbury was back after a month away with a broken elbow and won the best young rider, was seventh overall. And then Sophie Edwards was fourth on the final stage. And she's a relatively unknown rider for anyone outside of Australia, but 23-year-old track rider, road rider, the Oceania champion. So she's got a fancy jersey, winner of the Melbourne to Warrnambool, which is a big local race here, and a very promising sprinter, I guess, an all-rounder / sprinter. So to see her up there, very promising, and I think. Yeah, just a handful of the riders that caught my eye of that could be going, heading in a good direction.
Yeah, I think that's awesome that you mentioned all of those riders, Matt. I was definitely happy to see some of those names up there, especially Sophie Edwards, and just props to the ARA Skip Capital team and Team Bridge Lane, two Aussie National Road Series teams that have made their way over to Europe for a couple of months. And it's not easy to even get invites to races. I know that they were, having to email again and again for some race days. So I think like it's great that they've put their money where their mouth is in supporting women's cycling and to take full teams over there. And I guess this can be a segue into should this race, or it will be in the future, World Tour, because what a great opportunity for that level of team to be able to race this level of race and this particular race, because it was always actually one of my favorite stage races, and I know a lot of riders have enjoyed it. It's like a really nice area to race in, rolling roads, nice safe roads. It's pretty quiet, but it just makes you super fit kind of going into the summer season as well. And for Australians, it's got that extra significance because this is where we commemorate Amy Gillett, where she was tragically killed out on the road with her training partners. The Australian national team was here 15 years ago now, so just over 15 years. So that's always something that was always special for me to go and race there. And I think the Aussie riders hopefully are continuing that tradition of acknowledging that life and visiting the memorial. But like, you can't get better racing than this for your career as an up-and-coming rider trying to make it in Europe. So I'm sure that they would have gotten their names called out on the radio. I saw Gina Ricciardo, breakaway specialist in Australia, was in some breakaways. So, and no doubt other Australians were trying to get into those breaks too, and plenty of other smaller European teams. And that's how you get noticed. This is kind of like the draft in some ways for going into World Tour teams, is going into these kind of races.
Yeah, I mean, like, so you have every single race, every race in Europe has like smaller European teams that are able, every World Tour race has smaller European teams. You had like local teams in the UK able to race Ride London. You have those Australian teams that are able to race TDU and stuff. But at the bigger European races, it's really hard for those small teams to be able to start the race, let alone compete against the top teams. And Thüringen has always been such an incredible race for those up-and-coming riders and those small teams to be able to get some experience. I mean, I remember when I was on, I think it was UHC, we went to Thüringen, and it was a big week for us to be able to be there. And it's also such an easy race logistically for those smaller teams to be able to handle, because it's like a pinwheel style where you stay at the same place for the whole 6 days and you go from there. when you're racing like the Giro, for example, or the Tour de France Femme, looking at the course for that, Matt and I are going to have some like brutal road driving to be able to go from stage to stage. And teams like sometimes just don't have the means for that. It's not like every team has a bus where it's comfortable for the riders to travel from stage to stage. And so Thüringen is like a really awesome kind of entry point into Europe for a lot of riders. It's a race that's incredible racing, really well put on logistically, and also they have live coverage. They treat the riders really well. And so from that kind of standpoint, making it World Tour makes sense. But from the standpoint of developing women's cycling, to me, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense. And I think like there are other races that are World Tour that maybe don't deserve that status. And Thüringen does, but it's also looking at the development of women's cycling and where we're falling short at the moment. Making Thüringen World Tour is a step in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
It's also not like there's a shortage of World Tour races at the moment. The calendar's feeling very crowded. So
no, there's
adding
an excess.
Yeah. So I don't know if there are plans to remove any for next year, but adding extra races doesn't really feel necessary at this point.
It is a lot. There's a lot to keep up with. And yeah, and it's not like it's going to get any thinner in the
one question is like, I know that the Thüringen organizers would like to get that World Tour status, but ultimately what does that mean for them? Like, is it even beneficial for them to have that title? Because they still attract the best teams, not all of them, but enough of them to have good racing. So I don't really know the ins and outs of the ramifications of a different classification, but I think that they get quite good exposure. They give us good coverage, and they have viewers, and it's good racing, and they attract good teams. So I'm not quite sure what the benefit to them would be either.
There's an article in Cycling News written by Kirsten Frattini, great journalist, by the way. She's great. She's written a piece about the step up to World Tour, and she's quoting the race director Vera Holfeld, who said, I only want to hold the Thüringen Ladies Tour in the future if we have some of the world's best at the start. No one can guarantee me that without World Tour status, so that's why we submitted the application. So they only want the best there, and to be able to guarantee that, that's what they have to do. But read into that what you will, I guess.
Oh, that's a little bit disappointing, but I guess it's just like, yeah, we need that. We need those smaller teams to have this opportunity, and they're just slowly being taken away. And especially with like World Tour teams, like you have, Valencia in the beginning of the year, a week-long stage race, and almost every world team fields a team there. So even though it's a smaller level race, it's still like impossible for the local teams, the Spanish teams, or like any of the other teams that show up that aren't World Tour to be able to do anything. And yeah, it's this weird balance, right, that I think we haven't figured out yet, but we also haven't figured out the balance of having a World Tour teams. So it all kind of goes down to that we're growing really fast as a sport, and things are being left behind that like need attention.
Yeah, I think that's what's quite staggering, isn't it? When you have these conversations and you look just a few years back and see already how rapidly things are changing. But I think from the outside, as you say, you can think, well, everything's in a fantastic place, but there are things that are perhaps being not discussed to the extent that they perhaps need to. And I'd love your take on the relegation system. And again, I guess asking the question for listeners, what does that actually mean? How much is it going to affect, in your mind, the dynamic of racing if people are on that crunch point of we're going to lose our license this year as UCI Women's World Tour? So perhaps we're not going to field that race. How much of an effect and impact will it actually have in your mind, Abby?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for me, looking at the way that it's shaking out at the moment, the teams that deserve to be World Tour teams are going to be World Tour teams. They're easily ranked in the top like 7 of the rankings. And then you have teams that have the money to be World Tour, have the resources, but can't field the riders. And that's like Israel Premier Tech Roland and Human Powered Health. Those two teams, they're World Tour in status, but they just can't compete. And I think that brings that brings attention to that there needs to be a middle tier, because those teams would easily fit into a middle tier. And like Park Hotel Valkenburg, which has ranked in the top 15 in the past and has no interest in being World Tour because they're more keen on development. Like, I don't think it's impacting the racing so much at the moment, except for what races teams are showing up to, like having human-powered health at these smaller races. Uno Wax is going to smaller races and they're winning those races, which I think kind of proves that they are a level above the other teams that joined the World Tour in 2022. Like Uno X for me is a team that does deserve that status because they have the money, they have the resources, but they also are picking up the riders and developing the riders that they have to be able to compete against the top teams. And what it comes down to is like tying into the SD Worx conversation. We want teams that are able to take SD Worx down, or at least challenge them. It'll make the racing more exciting. And you can't be a World Tour team if you are not going to factor into the race. Like, you can't be Peloton Vaughter if you're a World Tour team. That's just simply not acceptable, in my opinion. And so I think what the relegation system is going to do is just take those teams out of the World Tour. If they have the budget and they're actually keen on women's cycling, hopefully they take that budget and they try to develop riders to be able to compete in the World Tour. That's what I want to see. And I think Human Powered Health has the budget and hopefully has the desire to develop women to be able to compete against like the biggest teams in the world. But you don't have to be a World Tour team to go to these big races anymore, or you've never had to. Like, teams races are always going to accept lower level teams. There's like not enough World Tour teams to field an entire peloton, and that's the whole point. So it's an interesting thing, and I think overall I approve of the relegation system in the women's. For the men's, it's like a whole different conversation for me, but for the women's, I think that they keep handing out World Tour licenses to teams that don't deserve it. That's when the relegation system is going to be beneficial to women's cycling.
No, I like that explanation, and I agree. Like, I think that there needs to be a bit of a shake-up because the last few years I think it's been too easy to get a World Tour license, so I don't think it's necessarily going to be a bad thing. And like Abby, I can't foresee any real negative effects. I think you just have to wait and see how it pans out, but overall, like, to promote the teams that are good enough to World Tour, that I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, like I'm watching Life Plus Wahoo kind of on the cusp of that World Tour battle. And that's a team that, you know, a British team that's been around for a long time and has developed some incredible riders into the World Tour. And I think that they would be like the top level pro team if we had that middle tier. But they're a team that I'm curious about how they would fit into the World Tour, and I think that they deserve that opportunity because of the attention that they've put into women's cycling, the care that they have for the sport. I mean, for me, a lot of it comes from the heart, you know? And I think women's cycling always, like us sitting here, the riders riding their bikes, the teams, I feel like the races, a lot of women's cycling is like, you have to care. You have to like love the sport. You have to have a desire to see the sport better. And I think, like, for me, that team has always had that. And so I want to see them in the World Tour, and they are on the cusp of qualifying for that World Tour license when they haven't been able to get it in the past. Whether they can then come up with the money to have the minimum, the requirements to be a World Tour team is a completely different conversation, because they couldn't do that last year, and so they didn't apply. But it definitely like opens the doors for some teams like that. And like WNT, Saratiza, like they should be a World Tour team, and they haven't applied in the past. And I don't know if it's because they don't have the budget or what. And I think I've heard that they are interested in the World Tour for next year, but that's like a team that I feel like should be pushed into the World Tour, because they are constantly in that conversation with the World Tour teams, if that makes sense. So I think it's good. I'm interested to see how it shakes out, and maybe the system won't work in the future because men's cycling is obviously way more established, and I don't think the relegation system works as well there. But women's cycling, we're still just like brand new when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, it'll be interesting. When it starts impacting the racing negatively is when I'm going to be bummed about it. When people are racing for points rather than racing for the win, that's when I'm like, okay, well, now we need to take a step back and figure out how to do this differently, because I don't want to see Canyon SRAM racing for, 7th, 8th, and 9th when I would rather see them trying to win the race.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just really interesting to get your take, because I think we can look at point systems, we can look at everything on paper, but it's interesting to hear, what does it actually mean? Does it mean X team will not be able to go to Y race? But actually, if they are still able to field it, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't see like any of the teams that are kind of removed from the World Tour not still getting invites to the biggest races. Like maybe they won't get invited to the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, which is basically why a lot of teams applied for World Tour status in 2022. But also, if you're not even part of the race, why would I want to see you there? Like, when it's this weird situation where you have like some of the smaller teams that don't have the budgets and the riders don't have salaries and stuff like that being more active in the race than World Tour teams. And that's just kind of a bummer for me. I mean, interesting, because I love watching those little teams like just try and try and try and try. But I also like want to see the racing be a little bit more dynamic, and for that we need stronger teams. And I think, yeah, that the more the World Tour teams are able to develop, and also it opens, if those teams kind of lose their status and there's riders on the market, then it means that other teams can kind of bolster their rosters even more and try to build a team that is going to not let SD Worx win every single stage of Thüringen with different riders.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next, with the likes of the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift. I mean, we talked about Thüringen. That's one example of SD Worx and their dominance. But yeah, I surely that won't be the case at the Tour.
Oh man, I think if SD Worx wins every single stage of the Tour, I might quit.
Quit.
Be a long week. Yeah.
I don't think so, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, you're not going to rule it out.
I mean, yeah, there's the Van Vleuten factor to consider in all of this, which, it's funny that last year and the year before, Van Vleuten's dominance was the problem, and now we're kind of like, come on, beat SD Worx. At least that's how I feel anyway. She'll be able to take it to them in the mountains of the Tour and the Giro as well, I guess. So I'm totally
smitten with Van Vleuten. Like, I used to be not a huge Van Vleuten fan, not a fan, but she was so dominant that maybe it's just like, you love an underdog, and Van Vleuten,
we're all for the underdogs.
For some
reason, it's set up perfectly, right? Because she's had such an ordinary spring. So, given how ordinary her spring was, she kind of is coming in as a bit of an underdog. I mean, WorldTour aside and all that, but this lead up with Van Vleuten kind of resting, I guess, ahead of the Giro and all of that, while SD Worx is winning everything. I don't know. It kind of sets it up nicely, I reckon.
Yeah, and I think, like, if we look at kind of the races to come, like, Van Vleuten is definitely the favorite for the Giro. I think it's going to be her and Guy Rialini when we see, like, how that goes. But we've got, like, Tour de Suisse is super open, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Marlon Russo will be there, and she's just, like, insane right now. So I feel like it will be another SD Worx show, but it's still not a guarantee. Like, I don't think that SD Worx is going to win every stage of the Tour, and I especially think there are riders that are targeting the two bigger races to come, the Giro and the Tour, that are just not on form yet. I mean, like, Cecilie Uttrup Ludwig, we've barely seen her this year, and she will be going for the Tour de France Femme. That will be a huge target for her, and like FDJ with Grace, who's riding pretty well at the moment, and how that team is developing, and Marta coming back from injury as well. It's like there are definitely teams that are just, I mean, I said it last week, they're just like, they've got bad luck at the moment, and SD Worx is just on a string of good luck.
Yeah, actually, do you know what? A rider that we didn't mention earlier, FDJ's Clara Caponi.
Mm.
Um, I've been so impressed with her, and I guess again because I had a closer eye on some of the British races in the last couple of years, but she took a stage of the women's tour in the spring finish in that, and second on day one of Ride London. But yeah, she's been someone that I've had quite a close eye on, and yeah, I thought she was really impressive this week.
Yeah, she like continues to be a really impressive rider, and she's still really developing as a rider. Like her specialty, I mean, she's got a really good kick, but she's also just been instrumental for that team and the growth that they've had over the last 2 years.
Yeah, completely.
Well, yeah, coming up, we've got Tour de Suisse. It starts on the 17th of June, so we do have like a little bit of a break. Like it's been full gas, but we have like 2 weeks until the next World Tour race. And then we're back on with the Tour de Suisse and the Giro, and then the Tour. It's just like boom, boom, boom. But yeah,
That's good.
We get to breathe for like a minute.
It only took the cancellation of one of the Peloton's favorite races to give us a break, right?
Yeah, and we're being very selfish, giving us a break, not the riders.
Yeah. Don't hurt the riders.
No, there's no break for them. They're all at altitude now because that's what you do now. Everyone just goes to altitude to train. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. Thanks you all for joining me. It's been awesome chatting. We had a lot to cover. Before we end the episode, this is, oh man, I didn't prep you for this, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
Oh, what's happening?
Okay, so we end.
I think I've got to go.
We end each episode with what we've been obsessed with lately. And I'm going to start with Matt. Matt, did you do any planning for this?
Put me
I
on the
know
spot.
I didn't.
I mean, my answer's the same as last week. The Expanse on the TV show, but I'll give you something else just as a little tidbit. One of my many passions is snooker. Terrible at it. Love watching it.
You just continue to be like a fascinating individual.
Yeah, I love this.
We're gonna have some chats on during the tour, Abby. You'll be surprised. So I love watching snooker. There's one of the all-time greats. There's a guy called Stephen Hendry. Those who know snooker will know who I'm talking about. 7-time world champion. He has a YouTube channel now, and he, among other things, he gives out tips and all this kind of stuff. But he does interviews with current and past players. And he did an interview this week with the greatest of all time, Ronnie O'Sullivan, who he sparred against during his career. They had a lot of good battles. And it's just the two of them in a room playing a bunch of frames of snooker, chatting about big moments in each other's careers, the moments they came across each other, psychology of sports stuff, a whole bunch of stuff. Just two guys chatting, just down the club almost, but it just happens to be probably the two greatest players ever to have picked up a cue. And just something about that just makes me very happy watching that unfold. So anyone that likes snooker that hasn't seen that, you'll love that. There's a nice little niche thing for you, Abby.
I like it.
It's the most niche. Mine is a podcast. So, well, a podcast / like a he does video sometimes as well, but I have always really loved Zane Lowe and his interviews with musicians, and I feel like there's been a couple lately that are just like so good. He had one with Ed Sheeran that was awesome about his new album Subtract. If you listen to the album files, shameless plug, then you also know that I love Little Sims, and he interviewed her recently as well. And he had one video with Boy Genius, and the three of them together are just like so I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with watching those three interact. And so his conversation with them was really awesome. So before we started recording this podcast, I was listening to his interview with Stormzy.
Oh, yeah.
Stormzy. They call him Storms. I know. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's Stormzy, but then on the podcast he calls him Storms, and I was like, well, maybe it's just they've shortened it. They've nicknamed his nickname. But he did an interview with him, and he was talking a lot about his faith and how that played into his recent album. And I think it's just Zane Lowe. He makes the interviews really personal and has just an incredible way of making it sound like you're just sitting at the table with the person he's interviewing and they're chatting and you're just kind of listening in. And that's how I view this podcast as well. So I feel like being able to listen to some of my favorite musicians just casually chat about like their family and the music that they've made is really cool. So that is my obsession this week.
His latest album is great too. Check it out.
It is really good. Yeah. Who's next?
I can go if Becky still needs some more thinking time. I have been obsessed for a couple of years now with the show called Alone. So it's like a survivalist show, and I've watched all the American seasons, and they've just had an Aussie season. So I've been obsessed with the Aussie one, and sometimes Aussie things are not quite as good as American-made things, but they actually did a really good job. The contestants were great, and the winner, I won't spoil it, but like the winner is probably my favorite winner of all of the seasons. They did an awesome job. So the premise of the show, if you've never heard of it, is they take 10 trained survivalists or nature kind of people. They have to have skills. They can't just be random people. They take them to the wilderness, and they drop them in remote locations, and they can't access each other's different areas, so that you have to be alone. You're only allowed to take 10 items with you, and it's whoever lasts the longest. And it's fascinating watching their skills, because it's really interesting seeing what kind of shelters they build, how they catch food, how they process food. But for me, the most fascinating part of it is the psychology of it, of being alone and not knowing how long you've got to go. They don't know when other contestants drop out, and the reasons why people are out there and the reasons they stay out there. I think it's like really interesting. So it's probably not for everyone, but I know it's a really popular show. So a lot of people like it, and I've loved it. And the Aussie season that wrapped up last week was awesome.
That's like when you are super into Survivor and you just want to take it one step further.
Yeah, it's like Survivor, but like, yeah, way more hardcore.
No, I was just going to ask, it's on SBS in Australia, right?
Yeah.
Gracie, is that right?
Yeah.
So just a plug for your employer there. Nice.
Well, they like points off for my employer, because I was working for them last week, and so I saw the spoiler before I saw the last episode, so I was a little bit worried about that. But there was no way of avoiding it, so I was just like, oh, fuck's sake. But it was still a very good last episode that I enjoyed, even though I knew
it. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to invite me on a Celebrity Island show to survive anytime soon, but I always wonder, like, what would my psychology be all about if I was in that position? I'd probably, I think it'd be fascinating, wouldn't it, to go on one of those? Or just horrendous.
Gracie, did you ever apply to Survivor?
No, I have never applied, but I know
you're going to.
I know someone that has.
I've applied 3 times. They have not accepted me.
Maybe next year is your year.
Man, I feel like getting on American Survivor would be way harder than Australian Survivor, just like numbers wise. There must be like thousands of people that apply, or tens of thousands.
Yeah. I'm like the perfect candidate, so I don't know why they haven't. Maybe I'm not dramatic enough.
Maybe they'll hear this and you'll get your invite in the post.
That would be awesome. I'm a little busy though.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have to cancel at least the Tour de France or the Giro in order to.
You're on your own.
That's all right.
Shall I finish up? I've had a little time to think on the spot. Obviously, you know I'm obsessed with your podcast. I've had many, many hours of trying to get my 1-year-old baby over the last year to sleep. And so you've kept me in fine company. But outside of cycling, I've become really obsessed with How to Fail with Elizabeth Day, another podcast. And she's a British journalist and author. And I love the hook and the premise of her podcast, because rather than interviewing high profile people from all walks of life in sport and entertainment about what's gone right, she asks them to come armed with 3 things that they feel were their biggest failures and what's gone wrong. And I love flipping that, again, getting that honesty from guests. And she's had some brilliant people on, and from my point of view, it's been very interesting to see very successful interviewers, broadcasters, presenters come on and actually say how many times they were rejected. They had to throw the plan out the window, become writers in order to get back in the door to do what they ultimately wanted to do, and because they were just failing all these auditions, and then have become some of the, you know, the biggest success stories. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's now, as you all know, multiple winners of BAFTAs and awards, and was on the writing team for James Bond. And she was saying the reason she started script writing was because she was just going to all these auditions and getting told, well, there's thousands of you. Everybody can come in here and kind of nail an audition. But what's different? So she became a writer. Then she ended up writing and starring in Fleabag, and the rest is history. But I love the idea of flipping that, you know, what's not necessarily been the most recent things that have gone right, but what at the beginning was your success story when it all went wrong.
Yeah, love that. It's kind of like the anti-highlight reel.
Exactly, I love it. I'd have plenty to talk about.
I've just saved that podcast. That's right up my alley, so thanks for that tip. I'm already downloading the first episode.
And I'm onto your tips, and just no spoilers, please.
Yeah, I feel like I've been consuming a lot of Ed Sheeran lately, and he talks a lot about his failures, and like I keep seeing him in interviews like constantly pulling up a clip of one of his like first YouTube videos, and he can't sing at all, and I think it's awesome. Like people look at like celebrities and stuff and think like, oh man, you've got it easy, but it's like it takes a lot of work to get to that level, and like a lot of people have worked very, very hard to achieve what they've achieved, and you just can't see the bad stuff because Instagram has made life a highlight reel, but we don't have to get into that.
That's another day.
Yeah.
All right, head on over to escapecollective.com, become a member, supporting some really cool people in doing some really cool things. So thanks so much to Escape for supporting us, this podcast, and also thanks to you all for supporting Escape. No one can hear my thumbs up.
We appreciate it.